we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am joined by Gridfailure, which is, in essence, Dave Brenner, also of Earsplit PR, in which capacity I interviewed him as part of the Whatever Comes Next 100 episode. But here today we are to talk about his music, his project, Gridfailure, and specifically the latest record, which is always a mouthful to say, Sixth Mass-Extinction Skulduggery Part 3, being as it is the third part in a trilogy. And as well as being, in essence, an apocalyptic kind of dystopian vision of the unraveling of society from a sort of thematic point of view, from a sonic point of view, it is in some ways a barrage and a bombardment of noise and various experimentation. But as we discuss in this interview, there are layers within this music that are more, I use the word soothing, which is perhaps ridiculous when you listen to this. It's not a soothing record, but there are a lot of different textures and dimensions to it that have a lot of very different feelings. And I think if you can handle some very abrasive experimental elements, this can be an incredibly satisfying, sonically and emotionally satisfying record. As we also discuss during this interview, Dave was actually making this album in parallel with Steve Austin making the latest Today is the Day record, Never Give In. And in fact, they both feature on each other's records. But I think if you listen to both records, even though they're quite different, the music's quite different, you might hear kind of sonic elements that seem to have some kind of affinity with each other. As well as Steve Austin appearing on the record, the latest Gridfailure release has many different guests, kind of too numerous really for me to talk about here, but I'll put them all into the description. It does also feature Greg Meisenberg, again on the Whatever Comes Next 100 episodes, and mastered by Dan Emery, who is also in the 100th episode. So there are various links for me, for the podcast, and but so many different interesting people involved in the making of this record. For those who are interested in supporting the show, you can go to Patreon, patreon.com/whatever comes next. If you will part with the mere sum of £5 a month, I will give you all full episodes, because as from the 100th episode, I've been putting out edited versions. Well, 100th episode, I just had way too much content to get through. But in the episodes following on from that, including this one, there was some extra content that I snipped out of this latest one. What I left in included a lot of discussion about the actual album itself, individual tracks, and I think there are lots of cool insights. In here, you can follow Gridfailure on Instagram. You can go to Facebook. I guess you can also go to X, even though I'm not on there anymore, but I will put links into the description. You can follow me on all social media, obviously not X, at Tom Osman Sounds. You can go to my website, tomosmansounds.com, for my music and writings on my music. As I keep saying in each episode, I will be on Amp War soon. The latest record that I recorded and released, Real Silence with Augurio Drama, I recently put on the Cancerous Plague, that is Spotify, so it's there. It's and various other places as well, actually, now that I think about it. I just didn't just put it there, but it is now more widely available. So you can also check that, should you so desire. And beyond that, I think here at 7:40 in the morning, and I'm about to work in 20 minutes time and then figure out the little bit of space where I'm going to finish editing this episode and put it out today, I'm going to play a track from the record at the end of this interview with a little clip coming up just now. And with that, there is nothing further to be said but Dave Brenner, who is Gridfailure. Take it away. Oh, different background.
exact same place I was last time, only I didn't realize I had that blur thing on until we started the interview. I don't even know why that was. I never used that shit. It must have been for some, I don't know, other random shit. Yeah, it was just automatically there.
You say that, but really you'd been butchering someone and there were body parts in the background.
Why wouldn't I show that? You know, wouldn't hide that.
Fair point. Fair point.
You
Dave,
want to sell records, you got to have corpses upside down in the background.
so I have several questions that I want to ask you about the latest album. And in fact, I was listening to it today, going around doing various different things. And I'm going to use a word which might seem very surprising or maybe not to talk about your music. There's something about it that's kind of soothing. There are
You
elements of
know,
it that are very jarring for sure, but I feel like within all of the textures of what you're doing, there are layers to it that are kind of ambient. There, it's like you could take away certain jarring elements. Not that I'm saying you'd want to, but it's kind of interesting to listen to it. There's an experience of it that's kind of like it's quite like a sort of a flow of the sea, I feel sometimes. So I'm
right.
kind of curious if that's like to what extent is that something that you sort of identify with when you think about the creation of what you do in these sounds?
It sort of depends on the release, I suppose, because there are, there's like kind of like the core grid failure sound and theme. Some of the records I'm completely solo, and I'll play instruments or whatever, and I'll do the vocals. There's no collaborators at all. And then this one has 26 guests on it. So, and each one of them playing completely different genres from each other and everything else. So it's with this record, like I guess what you're at the core of your question, yes, it is something I keep in mind. But there's certain records where I want, especially in some of the newer stuff I've been working on. This record is 2 years old at this point. So a lot of the stuff I put out since and is coming up now has a lot more of a direct pronounced beat than a lot of things, or a more rhythmic approach or a more verse chorus thing, just here and there. I'm not going full pop punk or anything. It's definitely just a little more of a focus, but that immersive sort of part of the landscape, part of your surroundings sort of vibe is very much what I go for. There's a lot of weather events and things like that I record, wind and rain. The whole Sixth Mass-Extinction Skulduggery series. Um, Very early on in Gridfailure, I had recorded a bunch of random vocal parts and beats and all kinds of just experimenting with microphones actually in the rain, sometimes right out of the window in my little studio here, like trying not to get electrocuted, just very random things, trying to actually record in downpours and crazy wind and everything, and almost getting hit by massive limbs in my backyard, and all kinds of different stuff. So yeah, there's definitely a very uh connected to nature sort of vibe to it, but it's generally not supposed to be. I mean, there's a lot of, you always hear birds and all that kind of stuff, but yeah, it's definitely more of an immersive, uh, yeah, audio quagmire, I guess. So yeah, with this one, I think a lot of the parts that I connected were from folks who sent material for, three or four random parts, and I spaced them out throughout to create a really kind of cinematic arc to the whole thing. So a lot of things go at the forefront and then at the end or midway through and shortly after that and things like that to add these sort of like connected arcs, because I knew it was a long, long record.
Yeah.
And instead of just having 80 minutes of like just garage noise or whatever, I wanted to make it kind of flow in and out to hold people's attention and unify the whole thing.
I think it's very interesting some of the words used there, talking about an immersive quagmire and talking about being cinematic, because there were moments where I actually found myself thinking about the latest Today Is the Day record, because I think this actually came up also. I don't know if it was when I interviewed him, but when I interviewed Michael Girard, or just hearing him talking to someone else about the idea of Swan's records being kind of like a cinematic journey. And I think
Yeah.
maybe Steve brought that up with me. And I was thinking about that with Never Give In, with the album as a whole, that it's like, and with Today Is the Day in general, that you get a lot of very different types of moods, and that can be even within one track, and then a lot of changes in tones throughout the album. And thinking about like the title track of Never Give In, it's like there are elements of it that are quite beautiful and delicate, and then like with, he's got like this quite gentle vocal that's going through a lot of it, and then these screams that go over the top of it. And I found myself thinking about it and thinking that it's like it's very interesting to sort of do something that to some people might be very off-putting, but it adds such an interesting texture and color. And I found that listening to your album as well, that I had that kind of like parallel of, maybe that's why I was sort of bringing up about things being soothing. It's like there are so many different layers to it, and it's very kind of emotionally satisfying in that sense, because you can get a lot of different kind of input. It's like if you're dreaming and things can
Right.
happen which can be really abrasive, or things that can happen that can be quite the opposite. And so to have all of that together in a journey is like a very rich experience.
There's definitely sort of a surreal, uncanny, or Steve even called it nightmarish or whatever style, I think, to what a lot of what I do. It's um, there's vocals with like many written verses in some of the songs that you can't even really tell that there's vocals going on. You know what I mean? Like I always publish my lyrics, but it doesn't mean people are even going to hear them or differentiate them some of the times. You know what I mean? They're very worked into everything. So a lot of times I'm just kind of, Mike Patton's like probably the biggest musical influence on me, and how he can just use his voice as an instrument and things like that. So like I find a lot of I guess beauty or whatever in mistakes and found sounds and things like that. And a lot of the stuff is actually worked around that versus writing a verse or a chorus or anything at all. A lot of times it's really just creating soundscapes or whatever around a certain specific, weather pattern or random beat or something. Like a lot of the submissions that came in on this record were were just sent to me as like, here's a piano part, here's a drum part, things like that. And I would create the songs around them or work them into something I had going on. It wasn't necessarily the artist playing directly to something I had already preconceived or whatever. Steve's part, you brought up all the Today's the Day's new record. They both came out the same day, my record and his record. We both were working on them heavily during the pandemic. That's when my second record of this series came out, and we couldn't make tapes or anything. It just came out digitally. And this one I heavily worked on during that time, while Steve was working on what is now Never Give In and the sister record to that, which will come out in the spring of next year. So we were both working on these records around the same time, both sat on them forever, both wanted to get them out of our systems forever. And then I asked him about playing on my record, and he was one of the last guys to come in and actually do it. And I thought he would just hit a guitar here and there on a couple of songs. And he sent me multiple guitar tracks for 5 of the 15 songs. And I went, now I have to kind of reconstruct and re-envision this whole thing. So I did that, got more submissions from some of these other people I was working with, put what I thought was the whole thing together. I was doing all the vocals, and I said, "Hey, Steve, you did 5 songs of this record. You want to do vocals on a couple of them? Here's like some lyrics." And he came back and goes, "Sure, here's lyrics and vocals, new lyrics beyond what I had written for the songs already. Here's a whole new set of lyrics and multiple vocal layers for all 5 of the songs that he had already played guitar for." So then I had to rework half of the record or a third of the record again, and then try to fit all of those lyrics and my lyrics for 15 songs into a J card for a cassette. So Steve came in and really, like, after this thing already had this crazy vibe to it, and added like all the vocals he provided are clean, those clean,
Yep.
hanging ethereal vocals. There's no raspy, no ripping, gutting, harsh Today's a Day vocals. It's all the stuff he did on like the Lay record and a lot of the new Today's Day record, and that sort of ethereal style. So his contributions alone added this immersive, cinematic, sad whole vibe to it that I could spread out through the whole record, heavily towards the end when it was all coming together in this apocalyptic wash of everything. And his stuff really made this whole sad thing. And then he asked me and to play on his new record, along with my buddy Mac Gollehon, who I collaborate with a lot. So I recorded Mac and I here for the song on Today's Day record, the Secret Police song. And then after we were done with that, then Steve asked me to do the video for Secret Police. So I had Mac come out and film and did that whole thing. So like, and then they both came out in the same day. So there's a ton of crossover between the Today's a Day record and this Gridfailure record, with coming out of the pandemic and things being held up and just taking forever to finally be purged, and both of us having this huge, we talked on Friday when the record, I was just like, we both felt this like lift, like we had like a house that we were carrying around for 2 years, on like a long flight, you finally get off and get the and just, you know what I mean, it was just
Yeah.
a great sense of relief for us both. So it was like an honor to be working. Steve's one of my best friends, but he's still one of my, you know musical idols, and so it's like it was a really cool thing to have these two so heavily interwoven coming out together like that. I'm ending the 3 album cycle with a 2 album post cycle, to think of, you know what I mean, how to make this the apex record of mine and have the other two work out of that. And he's the same way, with this one going into what's going to be the second one that comes out next year. So there's a lot to think about. If you just end a record a certain way, is that going to start the next one the way you want it to? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so, it may not matter to the listener so much. You know what I mean? If they're going to like a record, they're going to like it either way. But like, yeah, if you're trying to connect all these ideas and everything, and a storyline, any kind of concept like that through you definitely need to think about that instead of, you know, a normal album arc and ending. Here mine kind of does that, but it hangs, and it's the very last song. It's just heavily full of nature and storms. It feels like like everything's just washing away. Like it just goes
Mm.
from this apocalyptic blast into this everything washing away, and this sad, ethereal, angelic sort of sound. And I have that Morse code tapping out, and it's the Morse code is saying, "Save yourself from grid failure," and that's how it ends out. And then the second 2 records, Teeth Collection and Drought Stick, which I'll be releasing over the next couple of years, were supposed to be my second and third grid failure records, like almost 10 years ago. So that's some of my most early rudimentary stuff that I just kept building this theme around. And it was going to be these Sixth Mass-Extinction things kind of dropping between those two. And then it turned into what it is now with the 3 and a 2. So it's more of like, not that there's anything religious or Christian or remotely biblical or anything about the record, but the comparison about this series. But that's how I kind of look at it. It's kind of like an Old Testament, New Testament. It's kind of like the first 3 are happening now as we watch the world come apart, politically and everything else. But just our ecosystem, we're like, we're fighting about all these political battles and all these very important things, free speech and human rights and everything else. But nobody's paying attention to like the world just burning around
Yeah.
us, everything melting and burning and just, coming apart. And it's like, we're just watching it happen, letting it happen. That's kind of these first 3 are right now, and it goes more and more dystopian into this record. So it's kind of, there's like a blank where nothing is recorded, I guess. And then Teeth Collection comes in, and it's kind of like after the ashes. It's kind of that Terminator, when you see the future with like the biomech and it's kind of like that, but just this desolate, cannibalistic landscape. So that's why it's that I'm taking these records with all these, classical and jazz and all these pieces from all these talented people I work with, building it up into this big cinematic apex. And then the last 2 of the series are just this atavistic, sticks and stones, post World War III, post collapse of the ecosystem, sort of like just mutant survivalism. So it's going to be interesting to see how I can bridge into those.
There are specific tracks that really stood out to me that I'd like to get into, but also like I would like to go a bit into sort of like the history of the project and your musical history, because obviously when we talked before in that previous episode of the podcast, we talked about your experience in the music world, but I'd like to talk a bit more about your experience specifically playing. So tell me, how did this Gridfailure project come about in the first place, and where were you at in terms of like what you were doing musically when you got to that point?
Most of the bands I was ever in were in the mid to late 90s into just after, probably into like 2001, somewhere around there when I lived down in Pennsylvania. And then when I moved to Brooklyn in 2002, I had to work 5 times more than I did when I lived anywhere in Pennsylvania. You know what I mean? It was, you're moving to New York, you got, all of a sudden it was like everything was just like finding a new job, finding a new apartment. And, I was engaged and, it was like a whole different life. So there was, I don't know, I can't even think of how many years exactly, but probably 10 years where I wasn't in any active band at all. Like nothing. I wasn't playing anything. And then I picked up, got back into playing bass because that was my initial thing. I was a bassist for, in some punk bands and everything, and then a vocalist in some, death and hardcore and grind sort of bands. And I had never done like an experimental project or anything, but I was all of a sudden more into gear and everything as I was getting back into playing. Um, I tried, I was playing my buddy Rich, who I mentioned plays drums live in Gridfailure a lot of times. His band Vice Massacre, New York hardcore, gutter punks, gnarly, just ugly, out of dreamlike, out of tune, not out of tune, but out of like standard time signatures and stuff, like kind of hardcore band. I was playing bass and doing some vocals and everything, and then I tried out with a couple of projects to put some stuff together, and nothing really fully panned out. And then I, my friend at the time, Lee, who lives right over in Nyack, right over the mountain from us, has done Theologian for how many years? Yeah, I mean, he's been doing, dark ambient industrial stuff since like the 90s. And I was getting into working, doing some press and working with Theologian more. And we're right over the hill. And he was like, "Hey, you just want to come over and jam sometime?" And I said, "Yeah, what the hell? You're like right over there." And that was the first time I'd ever been in anything where it was like, you don't need to bring a bass and your amp and your tuner or whatever. You can just have some pedals, or like, here's an idea I want to, and that was where the whole idea of I'd listened to tons and tons of experimental stuff before then, but just never was walking around creating it, and I was never recording my own stuff. So with Theologian, I started to pick up and put some equipment together and started to record more of my own stuff here, and then take it over there to be edited and used and processed however it was going to be in the Theologian thing. But it opened up my whole vision of like what the possibilities were. And it was at that hungry stage where I was coming back to try to like do something again, whatever. So Theologian thing, I was doing live stuff and recording. I did tons and tons of, we were so prolific during that, like just over a year and a half or whatever I was involved in it. And that ended pretty poorly. And that was, I started Gridfailure in 2016, I guess February 2016. I turned, it turns 10 years this winter. That's when I came up with it and started working on the first record. I released my first record in May of that year, 2016, and 2 weeks later, I was out of Theologian. It was all of a sudden, it was ugly, and I think he saw it as like, you know, I don't want to say like it was like a threat to what he does by any means because he's been so established and everything else, but you know what I mean? It was
A
like
conflict.
it was just yeah, it was just kind of, it just got really ugly really quickly, and I just went, hey, fuck it, like now I've got this thing, like I'm just gonna go, just go do this, like I'm not gonna say I'm gonna be bitter about some thing. It opened up my mind to all this other stuff that was kind of just you can just look at anything around you and go, wow, what can I do with that as far as a photo goes, or whatever. Just Gridfailure in general just put everything into this perspective that my history with artwork and graphics and layouts and photography and everything I've always been into my whole life outside of music could all of a sudden, and I wanted to get into videos, and all of a sudden this became that outlet for like literally everything. So every other band I've ever been in was like, hey, let's get together Tuesday and Thursday for 4 hours and learn the set and practice the set and then work on this new riff and then meet again 2 days. It was like this thing. Oh, so and so can't make it. Oh, we don't have drums. How the fuck, we're gonna get together? Should we wait? Should we, and it was always that, like, you know, any one of the members could hold up everybody else. No one likes a song title. All of a sudden that holds up Gridfailure was like, fuck it, I can just make a name up and make something and release it that day and not have to wait on anybody. And it was just kind of like that. It was just this. sudden freedom or whatever. And I just really leaned into it. So I made up that's why, I mean, it's like I said, the project only turns 10 years old next year. And I've got 42 titles or something like that on Bandcamp. You know what I mean? It's like I've just been making up for all the time that I wasn't creating, and I'm just going for it. That's why it's, I could sit and really refine things a lot more, but that's just not this project. This is supposed to be a very, you know, uh, instinctive, like ritualistic, just, you know, uh, amorphous. I think of it more as like an art project than a band. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
like the way other people come into it and collaborate without knowing what they're getting into either. It's more fun to create that way rather than to refine a chorus until, oh, I got to get that hook just right. It's like that shit's cool, and it really changes the dynamic of a song. But these aren't songs in the same sense. You know what I mean? You're not going to go humming most shit on this record. You know what I mean? There's a cool
Yeah.
line here and there that might stick in your head, but it isn't. It's just different stuff, than trying to refine something. I don't want to refine. The more I refine things, the more I start disliking them.
I wanted to get back into, I always have to look it up so I can actually say it correctly. Sixth Mass-Extinction Skulduggery III.
Yes, there you go. Did it better than I did last.
I did want to talk about a few specific tracks. So last time around when we chatted, we talked about Neurosis and we talked about that kind of like particular era of them. And there was a track on the album. It was Hybrid Warfare. It made me, that track specifically, this is like a very, very specific reference point. It made me think of the track Enemy of the Sun. You know, where there's that whole kind of like weird ambience and like shouting and stuff before
Yeah,
everything breaks in.
right.
I found myself thinking of that, and maybe it goes back to your point of what you were saying
Huh.
before about like the nightmarish quality. It's like kind of things bubbling under the surface, but it's like there's not a payoff in a dramatic sense, but it was a very satisfying track, and I really enjoyed that kind of atmosphere that one created.
That thank you. I mean that I never would have, put a Neurosis comparison to that one. That's like almost like a EDM, like trip hop sort of song or whatever, when it actually comes in. That was the basis of that song. That clicky sort of trap EDM beat in there is Graham Scala, who's he's in like Bleach Everything and US Christmas and a ton of different bands. But his project Interstitia is it's like it's an electronic, uh it is that sort of stuff. It is this dancey, trippy, psychedelic, super drug haze, weird, club sort of stuff, project. And we did a record together that we released 2 years ago, I believe. Um, a fully collaborative album while that was coming together, because that was one of those records that took like 5 years to put together. It kept like happening throughout the pandemic and just hang-ups, everything else. And two people working remotely, super busy people. It takes forever to put some of these collaborative records together. And that was one of the beats that he decided he didn't like for the record. And I mean, I had a folder of them, and he was like, just take all. There was like 8 beats, and he was just like, I'll just throw all that shit out. I got better software, and I'm like feeling this new vibe now. I want to use all this other stuff. And I was like, but these are cool. Like, let me keep these shits and do something with them, right? And he was like, yeah, whatever. So that was kind of that. I had this weird trippy beat, and yeah, the full title is Hybrid Warfare in Defense of One's Habitat, and it kind of came from the inspiration that of like humanity at war with our own planet is kind of the vibe of the whole record and series. Like on the prior record, I had one about ICBMs in the eye of the storm or something was the title of it. And it was about how, in Trump's first term, he said, like, can't we just nuke the hurricanes or some shit like this one time at one of those news conferences, and the whole place just like, you know what I mean? It was like, this is really what, and now this is going to blow up on Twitter. Like everyone's going to say this shit, like the earth isn't round. And like, now we can nuke hurricanes because they're man-made anyway. It's like, you know, what reality, like how are we going to save the planet if we can't even agree what shape it is? You know what I mean? It's it's
Yeah.
it's it's asinine. So it's like that's where this one came from. I imagine troops like being sent in, in this rain at night with like bombs and just like bombing woods, just bombing mountains, just bombing the ocean because it's the fucking planet. Just like take it out. You know what I mean? And that was kind of it. And then my buddy Mac, I think that was just a random trumpet thing that I had not even recorded for this song or album or anything. Just he comes out here and jams in this joint. I just record tons of shit sometimes, and it has no real doesn't always have a specific purpose. So that was just some random thing, and I took his stuff and clipped it up with Graham stuff and some noise, and it made the vocal. And it just kind of came together. It's with the rain and everything else. So that's that immersive stuff you're talking. It's like I sampled
Yeah.
like troops marching to war or whatever with the rainstorm that I had recorded, and then those weird synths and everything come in, and it's yeah, that was just kind of an amalgamation of different sounds that shouldn't go together. Let's put a trap beat with a jazz trumpeter and like harsh noise and some whacked out horror synths, and like make the planet, make the U.S. Army go to war with the planet in the song. Like, let's go.
Yeah, well, it's funny, like, because when I look at some of the notes that I wrote, it actually ties in with some of the things you said there. Because I wrote that it had an ebb and a flow like a storm underwater, and
Yeah,
so yeah, there was that. There's kind of like a push and a pull to it.
the keys have that weird proggy sort of vibe to it that it's a kind of a chorusy weird sort of vibe to them, and yeah, and yeah, like anything with rain or whatever can automatically, even fire, whatever. Sometimes it's hard to differentiate rain from fire depending on how it's recorded or whatever. But like leaving that staticky, wet sound in it rather than make it crunchy and crisp like a close up to a fire. It's very easy to mistake rain for a stream, for a river, for any sort really water sort of source. And I've found this out by having sampled so many different types of nature and storms and everything else. And sometimes I listen back, and because I don't have it marked, and I'm just like, was that a storm, or was that over by the stream up here, or was that from the mountains by the creek, or that you try to place like where that was from, and you look at the date and you match it up with some video clip you have, like, oh, that was up at the cabin. Okay, that was the stream out there by in Bald Eagle State Park, or you know what I mean? Like, oh, that was
Yeah.
just a storm that I recorded out here that's in this video, or so that's another thing that is a constant head kill, is the organization of doing all this stuff. Because like again, I could be playing synth through my recent bass rig on the down tuner pedal or something, and then not know, like, hey, was that synth, or was that way down tuned guitar? Like, what the hell was that? So organization is key with everything, because otherwise, especially trying to merge elements from those other folks, I always want to make sure everybody's credited, and I'm not taking somebody's music without saying so and so definitely did this. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's keeping track of all that stuff is really important, because you get to the end of the record and you have to put all that shit together over 80 minutes of music, and you're just like, wait, what is file 001v2 mean? Like,
Well, to that point about who plays what, another track I wanted to highlight: Sixth Mass-Extinction Skulduggery III, Acquiring a Taste.
the title
So
track. Yeah,
that one, it actually, I don't know if it's actually violin, but you've got a very little minimal sound that sounds like
that's
a violin. I love that texture going
that's
through it. That's
cello.
great.
That's
That's
Ben from
cello.
Megalophobe. His in-laws are based in Germany, and they've got this little cottage where they stay when he and his wife go over there, and there's just this upright cello sitting in the corner, and he was just like, hey, I got this cello over here, you want to do something with it? I'm like, yeah. Like, hit that shit. So yeah, like he went over there just one time and just sent me a couple random clips, and we used them in our collab, one of our collab. So we have uh three prior collaborative records together, and our fourth one is 99% done. We're working on some mixing and stuff now, so that'll come out shortly as well. And we work together more than anybody else I work with. Gridfailure, Ben and I. So he knows that pretty much anything that he records or whatever we can use in some case. I'll use it, he'll use it, or we'll use it in some kind of combined collaborative way. And that was one of those ones that was just sitting here, just some random Ben, like, hammering off on it's like this weird, you kind of imagine like World War II or something, and like you watch like Saving Private Ryan or Inglorious Bastards or whatever, and all these like bits of art and music that kind of come through when they're in those towns, and being bombed out, whatever. Like, that's kind of the vibe that I heard when I heard that cello thing. And Jared from Secret Cutter and Orphan Donor did that drum beat. And again, that was just, hey, I worked a project for him. Hey, give me some drum tracks, kind of one of these things. And he just sent me like three or four drum tracks over a couple of weeks years ago. And I took again, like, hey, these shouldn't belong together. Put them
Yeah,
together. You
I
know what
was
I
gonna
mean?
ask you who did the drums because I really like the way that the drums evolve on that as well. Because with the cello and the kind of like the pulse that you've got, first of all, it has a really great
Then
atmosphere.
I have a drum machines behind there and synth and bass, and I forget what all's on that. And then that's one of the ones that Steve Austin played guitar on, and that's his clean like I have the heavy screaming, like, torture vocals going on through the whole thing. But that long, clean spoken word rant is Steve. He just wrote that shit and just hit it. And it's like it gave it this entire like end time preacher sort of vibe or something. He comes on, he's like, "You're all a bunch of animals," and he just goes into that diatribe the whole way through. And it was funny because we did the listening session on Bandcamp last week before the record came out, and there was only a few people on there, but I was taking everybody on each song, and that song has 5 or 6 people on it or something like that, and I was listing all that in there and then talking about each person and everything else and trying to fit it all in before the song was over. And that song's like 12, I forget how long it is. It's like 15 minutes long, I think, or something. It's just ridiculous because Jared's drum thing was just this long thing that just goes, and it goes from that slow sort of like tribal thing to like sort of a jazzy roll into this thing, and then by midway he's just obliterating that. He's just going batshit. And Steve, you hear him like kind of getting a little more agitated, but like restrained in his vocal thing, and I'm just going unhinged in the background, and like all that stuff kind of swells together. So yeah, that's one of those things you have to keep in mind. Like, if you just have feedback for 15 minutes, sure, there's some people out there that are probably still going to listen to that more than once, but they're few and far between. If you want people that actually like music to listen to something this out there, you know what I mean? Like that, Jared's drumming alone is just like I could just sit and listen to him play. So like that to me, like it doesn't matter what else is going on, you could already hear that. And then Ben's thing adds that hook that makes it so like sort of sad and like poetic. And yeah, I that was a really hard one to really just pull together because of its length, and but I didn't want it to like blow up into something and then fade out. I just kind of wanted it to just slowly just grow. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And yeah,
No,
Steve's
definitely.
rant. I was during the listening party while that song was playing. I turned to Liz and I said, "This is on my record." I was like, "Holy shit!" You know what I mean? Like once these things are done, I don't like. Okay, the masters are approved. Okay, I got the tapes back. I listened to it. I won't listen to it again for fucking ever. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
there's so many. I buy records that I want to listen to from other people. I have other stuff I want to make. I don't sit and listen to these records after they're done.
Yeah.
Hardly, like sure, it's cool to go back and check it out. Or if you're making a video, you're going to hear that one song 3,000 more times while you're cutting a video and editing it and that kind of thing. But yeah, it was cool just to be surprised, like not floored by any means, but just to play it back during that listening session and be like, this record's actually coming out now. That's on my record. That's Steve. Like that is fucking sick. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was really cool. Like when your hair stand up in the back of your neck about your own stuff. Like it's it's like, hey, all right, cool, man. I'm happy this thing's kind of coming out now.
I'm gonna let you get away shortly. I want to ask you a practical question, but I want to ask you something else first. And you talked a little bit, about sort of within the sort of apocalyptic aspects, talking about war and talking about Trump and talking about a bit kind of politics. And I was wondering, I've interviewed people before who make sort of experimental noise music that is not necessarily like overtly political. It's not like crust punk or hardcore necessarily, but I'm curious about whether there is an aspect of protest of one sort or another in what you're doing. Would you identify that within Grid Failure?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I don't like to sit and go, hi, I'm a leftist, libtard, commie, whatever. You know what I mean? But I am like I really am from. I came from a very conservative background, but I've always been a much more left, leaning person or whatever. I'm defined that by the political structure, not by choice. You know what I mean? Like I'm called the left. I'm called a Democrat. You know what I mean? Like I don't necessarily like I vote Democrat because I don't think anybody's doing enough about the environment, no matter, any party is doing enough. But the Democrats are the ones that show any sort of give a fuck, like
Yep.
any sort of actually trying to pass bills or anything else, at least on the American end anyway. And, there's other people out there trying to do things. So on the environment alone, I am automatically characterized as being from the left. And yes, I believe every bit of grid failures. There's a lot of the double entendre sort of layered duality in a lot of the vocals. So like I could be singing specifically about a fault line or some kind of natural disaster, but it's also mirroring. It could be read as mirroring from like some sort of personal existential mental crisis or something someone's going to. So you can kind of like it's like that's the whole thing. It's like I'll write something and put it out there, and then it's for anybody who actually endures this stuff to determine what it's about. You know what I mean? Like I want there to be a multi-pronged interpretation of a lot of it. Now that's not necessarily the sense with this record or the series because it's a very conceptually based. It's more of someone in one of the reviews that I posted on the record last week called it less of an album, but more of a diary of the apocalypse or something like that. I don't believe it was. You wrote something similar to how it sounds like I forget your review said something about it being a journal or something.
There was that was Duncan Evans.
Duncan wrote it. Yes, you're right. You put me in touch with him. Duncan wrote that. He wrote something similar to that. I don't think it was that review, but regardless, that put into perspective for me because that is what it is. It's kind of this record is kind of that snippets of what's going on. It's not really following a chronological timeline. It's more smashed together from things that happened throughout this whole thing. And yeah, like the ecological crisis is definitely at the core of this, but this record itself is more about humanity devouring itself in the midst of this crisis, going to war with ourselves and with the planet instead of being like, hey, let's fix the planet so we have more space to fight about Bibles and guns and babies and drugs and everything else. You know what I mean? Like we can't if we're all battling forest fires. We can't if we don't have any water. We can't if we can't breathe the air. So it is definitely a political statement in that sense, but it's not necessarily, like I've written directly political stuff directed at Trump or Republicans or whatever. I have definitely done that in the past. My collaboration with Walking Bombs was the most political, sort of thing in that whole, realm. But yeah, I definitely come from a very punk and hardcore background where everything is, I think, just by nature supposed to be, rebellious and sort of an outcry. It doesn't have to be about a specific point in time or at a specific party or anything like that. But yes, there is definitely that feeling of unrest and unease and anger at the establishment or whatever in pretty much everything that comes out of Gridfailure. There's never anything that's soothing or it's going to be okay. Like that doesn't exist here.
You say that, and yes, and yet, like one of the first things I said to you was that it's like, well, there's an aspect of this record that's kind of soothing to me, but maybe that says more about my fucked up state of mind.
Yeah. Well, you're around. You see what's going on. You live here too. It's it's soothing because it's kind of like when someone's all jacked up after like they're trying to not fight somebody, or people are like, hey, chill out, have a cigarette. The cigarette isn't actually calming you down. It's raising you up to the point you're at so you even out. You know what I mean? That's the grid failure. That's like, hey, we are boiling. We are in the water. We are boiling. It is about to, you're about to be fucked. So jump out, turn down the heat, something. It is more about, so like, and again, Alex Haber's, piano pieces that I spread out throughout the record really add that, really, really sad classicals, sort of arc to the whole thing, which is another soothing part. And then Hazard from in Paris, he does La Chance du Hazard and his black metal band Hazard. He does this crazy orchestral dark opera. Like it is just the darkest the darkest shit you could ever hear is Le Chance du Hasard is just the darkest thing there is. It is just such an epic, apocalyptic, frightening cinematic thing that he does. And so the pieces he sent really added a very theatrical cinematic sort of aspect as well. So I think a lot of those things, and then Layla's soft vocals on parts of it, and there's a lot of things like that. Like most of the soothing parts that you're talking about were not things that I made. They're either nature, they're either nature, it's like that falling rain in the background or whatever, or
Yeah.
fire, or it's one of my collaborators' piece because it's not, everything that comes out of over here just sounds, like auditory cancer. It's just it doesn't. Like I said, there's no safe space in this. This is just like everybody is to blame and everybody's the victim, and it's all going down. So tune in or fuck off. It's like it just it's the sound of the world.
Fair. Thinking about the way that people can get hold of the album. So you can get it digitally on Bandcamp. It's on the various cancerous streaming services.
It
In
is
terms of people
indeed.
getting physical copies, so I see that you can get a triple cassette of
Yeah, of
Sixth
all three,
Mass-Extinction.
the first three records, and then I'll probably do another box set of the Teeth Collection and Drought Stick when they're out because they may be double albums as well. So they may be two albums as four cassettes as a second box set to this box. I don't know. I haven't even gotten there yet. But yeah, these three it combines the art from all three because I drew the artwork for the records and then manipulated it. So it's got art from all three records kind of wrapped together in this cool little sleeve that Greg Nefarious helped put together, and he put it out. And that's where it is. You go to nefarious.com, nefarious-industries.com. I'm sorry. That's there. Each artist there has their own like release page for the newest record or whatever. And this we combined all three of the records into one release page. So if you just go there, and it's like Nefarious 50 or whatever is the actual number.
Yeah.
So if you nefarious-industries.com, that landing page has all the videos from all three records, all the streaming services linked, the Bandcamp, the merch, everything, the shirt. It's all in one spot. But yeah, you can get it through Bandcamp. It's on all the other services as well. Gridfailure. I have a link tree. It'll take you to all the social media and everything's linked there.
And I
And
see on Bandcamp on your Gridfailure page, it says that the cassette just for part three is sold out. Is that completely sold out, or that's just on Bandcamp?
all three of them are pretty much because we put whatever stock was like. 'Cause only the first one was actually made on tape prior to this all coming together this year. That's why, because when two came out, we were still in the pandemic and you couldn't manufacture anything. You couldn't make tapes, and it took forever to get out of that, and prices were sky high, and there was everybody was backlogged with other people's projects and whatever. It took forever to come together. So we pressed two and three simultaneously, and then made the covers. So basically, most of the stock of those went into these box sets because I was just, if anybody wants to buy this, it just makes more sense to buy all three of them at a cheaper price than buying the three of them over the course of time and not having the cool little box set joint they
Yeah.
all come
No,
in. So
it does look
we
very
just
cool
kind of
having them together.
yeah. So yeah, we actually yeah, most of the, I mean, a bunch of the first tape have sold, but yeah, then once we made these, I wanted this limited box set, so we pretty much sucked up the supply of most of those into these. But yeah, like it's you know, if I sell all three of those, or all 50 or whatever there are the box sets, I'll be amazed. I'll be happy. I'm not trying to move 300 copies here, but again, it's a large body of work, and it's a large undertaking for anybody to, I know how, I don't, there's I get to buy one out of every 100 records I want to buy. You know what I mean? It's like you got to eat.
Yeah.
Everything else keeps going up. So I fully understand people don't just have $30 to shell up, but it's like it's like you get, I don't know. There's like 45 people on this whole thing, and I forget how I added up. But I forget it. It's like almost 3 hours of music, I think. So it's I really like the way they came out in that little box set shell and everything. I think it looked very tight, and I have one around here somewhere. It's out in the other room. Yeah, I would hold it up and put it on display here, but I don't have one sitting in front of me. But yeah, they're very cool. Everything is at Nefarious Industries. Greg,
Yeah.
he plays on the record. He plays on, I think, all three of these records, and he's played live drums and bass for Gridfailure at different points. And he's always been extremely supportive of an artist that doesn't, sell him hundreds of records. So forever thankful for him for, taking any of this stuff on under the label's wing. So
Well, he's from my very limited experience with talking to him. He's a very cool guy, and I am a big fan of his drumming as well. I think he's a fucking brilliant
yep.
drummer.
I've been
So
working with him since that was how I came to meet him, is when they were launching Nefarious Industries, and I had worked with East of the Wall for years, so a bunch of different things. He was very tight, that whole Jersey scene with him and all those other bands, and they were doing that a fucking elephant drugstore split to launch the label or whatever. And yeah, that was how he got in touch, and I've worked with him pretty much ever since. For so last year we did the 100th release compilation. I had a track on that, and that was another thing that held up these tapes and everything else a little more, because that was a huge undertaking of taking all these extremely diverse experimental artists into an LP, and trying to move that to people that generally, like, yeah, there are thrill seeking listeners out there, but a lot of people like what they like, and they aren't ready to just dive into 14 artists they've never heard of anymore. Like that, I don't know, that's always the one of my favorite things to do, was get one of those like relapse comps or something and be like, oh, I know like maybe half of these bands, but there's at least half I don't. You know what I mean?
yeah,
That was so yeah, big props to Nefarious Industries. A lot of good stuff coming out right now. The Irk record just came out a week ahead of mine. My record came out Friday, and the Defigurement record comes out in a week and a half or 2 weeks, or in the 17th, and all over the place. I mean, just ridiculously face melting grind, sick ass kind of UK noise rock, and then Gridfailure somewhere in the middle. It's like, I don't know any other label that's got that diverse of a thing, like a release schedule within a month or two of each other.
yeah.
Kind of wild.
Well, props to Nefarious Industries, and props to you, Dave. Thank you very
Yeah,
much
and
for
to you,
your
Tom.
time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
Always,
having me. It was good time talking.
always a pleasure, sir.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Thanks, everybody.
Oh,